Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is right around the corner, which means that yes, it's finally time for this long-awaited video about Aquaman. I know this seems incredibly weird since this is the first time I'm talking about this movie on my channel. If you're curious, I've never made a video about Aquaman because, truthfully, I never felt like there was a good time to do so in the past. However, the time is finally here, which means it's time to take a trip down to Atlantis. Aquaman, to me, is everything DCEU films should have been, an incredibly funny yet heartwarming adventure that's worth seeing through because of its fantastic camera work, great choreography, funny comedic moments that aren't annoyingly repetitive, greatly executed callbacks, and beautifully saturated visuals. And while Aquaman does have its flaws, what allows the viewer to ignore a lot of those flaws is this unexpected explosion. What? Aquaman was able to use random explosions as transition points in its story? Does that mean I can't use it in this script for this video? I'm just kidding. Seriously though, what allows the viewer to ignore a lot of this movie's flaws is Arthur Curry himself. Jason Momoa's Aquaman is one of the most likable superheroes we've ever seen in a live-action comic book movie, let alone within a DC movie. Part of that is because he's effortlessly cool and has one hell of a sense of humor. But more importantly, the real reason is that he's the most normal dude ever. He doesn't necessarily feel like a superhero in comparison to someone like Wonder Woman or Batman. His reactions to certain things throughout his journey feel genuine enough to make you think, yeah, I'd react the same exact way if I was him. You never get a sense of Aquaman's reaction being forced, nor are they set up in the commonly criticized MCU type of humor. I mean, come on, we're talking about a character that saved his and Mera's life based on something he saw in a movie based on a children's book. How can you not love him? Just to showcase the other side of our lovable, bumbling idiot hero that is Aquaman in this movie, a serious moment that perfectly encapsulates how admittedly human Arthur is when Arthur initially chooses to not go with Mera to Atlantis when she first comes to him for help. By that point in the movie, we already understand Arthur's internalized anger against Atlantis. That anger comes from the fact that Arthur has been outcast by Atlantis since he was a young age due to Atlanta having a baby with a human. This, of course, helps justify Arthur's perspective of not wanting to help Atlantis. It also helps you immediately understand why he doesn't feel like Orm's actions are his problem until Orm finally attacks the land. Orm attacking the land put Arthur's dad's life at risk, and that's when everything changed for Arthur. It's these types of moments that allow the movie to build the message it's trying to convey to the audience, the Atlanteans, and Aquaman himself by the end of the movie. Arthur not being a full-breed Atlantean is his biggest strength because he has a much better perspective as to how the world works both on land and under the sea, unlike his brother Orm. And as soon as you begin to understand that this is Arthur's biggest strength, that's what makes watching Arthur's journey to maturing and becoming the king of Atlantis worth every single minute of this movie's runtime. A common complaint about Aquaman over the years is that Aquaman is too formulaic, or that the repetitive use of explosions to progress the movie's story and sound cues to amplify a moment makes the movie bad. However, I genuinely disagree with this sentiment. To me, Aquaman benefits from having a fairly formulaic story and from the use of sound cues to amplify certain moments in the movie. Unlike Marvel, the DCEU never really had the world building the MCU had, meaning that none of the movies ever built upon one another's story. Outside of Wonder Woman, DCEU films also never really did a good job at helping the casual audience understand the significance of certain story beats or certain name drops that happen during a movie. With Aquaman doing exactly that, I think it actually made the story easier for viewers to understand and also had certain story beats resonate more than they would have without the sound cues, even if they're a bit much at times. For example, having a sound cue as Mera reveals her powers to both Aquaman and the audience at the beginning of the movie helps lay the groundwork for Mera earning her big hero moment in Sicily after spending so much time guiding Aquaman throughout the movie. It also immediately helps the viewer understand that Aquaman is actively subverting the typical supporting character who happens to be a girl, is also a damsel in distress who needs the hero protagonist because her life depends on him superhero trope, which is something I genuinely appreciate and I feel doesn't get enough credit. The moment of Black Manta reintroducing himself to Aquaman after creating his Atlantean-powered suit, which by the way is one of my favorite moments in the movie because we get to see him actively reverse engineer Atlantean technology, is worth it because of the sound cue amplifying the more than worth it callback moment where Black Manta pulls out his sword, referencing Aquaman and Black Manta's first encounter. Aquaman having his big moment of walking out with his brand new trident and armor after his emotional discussion with the Kraken is well worth the wait because every aspect of the movie conveys to you that Aquaman has finally become who he needs to become after such a long journey. This is going to seem incredibly random, but what's underrated to me is the moment when Aquaman finally embraces becoming a king, not because he has a choice or because he wants to, but because he's the only hope people have. I love that it comes from him finally sacrificing what he wants for the greater good, rather than the hero finally overcoming the rookie mistakes or decisions they made when they first got superpowers. You know, the more I talk about Aquaman, I'm starting to realize that this movie kind of slaps. This entire movie feels like James Wan and Jason Momoa took every single creative risk imaginable because you can almost tell that for more than half of these ideas, their train of thought was, wouldn't it be so damn cool if we somehow managed to make this happen? And then somehow they did. We're talking about a movie that has all of the following things: Atlantean armor that looks like it's inspired by Power Rangers, an octopus playing the drums, a Cobra Kai name drop, a third act that feels like it's straight out of an Uncharted game, a final battle that's a literal underwater Star Wars fight, and a final fight between the two main characters with a more than deserved callback moment. They shockingly pulled these ideas off, and what makes these ideas easy to appreciate beyond the creative execution of these ideas is the camera work and cinematography in Aquaman. Historically, I've never been the type of YouTuber to talk about the camera work or cinematography in movies because I'm just a superhero fan who loves to talk about superhero movies, shows, and video games for people's entertainment. What do I know, right? However, it's hard to not appreciate these things in Aquaman because both the camera work and cinematography are what make Aquaman a ridiculously engaging film even all these years later. In regards to the visuals, there are so many things I can list off because of how beautiful certain scenes are in this movie. The reveal of Atlantis, still stunning all these years later. The final fight scene with Aquaman and Orm on land, one of my favorite visuals in this movie due to how good Aquaman and Ocean Master's costumes look in this scene. It also helps that there's a shockingly good use of slow motion in that fight. The beautiful colors in the beautifully heartwarming scene where Aquaman's dad does the final walk to the dock in this movie to finally reunite with Atlanta, the most colorful scene in this movie, even if the CGI is a bit hit or miss. And in regards to the camera work, all of the action scenes are a ton of fun because of how playful the camera work is in every action-oriented scene. Whether it's the camera work in Orm and Aquaman's first battle underwater early on in the movie, the big set piece in Sicily, or the camera movement that follows Black Manta as he falls to his death, or when Aquaman and Mera fall into the sand and the movie legitimately becomes an Uncharted movie, all of these moments are so damn good because of the camera work. The best part, though, is that none of these things are my favorite moment of the movie. It's the moment of Mera and Aquaman diving into the trench. That moment of Aquaman is such a fantastic moment, and it's because of the creative decision to cut back and forth between a close-up of Aquaman and Mera with a ton of sound as they dive into the trench to a wide shot with almost no sound at all. It's already a tense moment as is, considering how visually dark this scene is, but because the movie gives us two compelling perspectives, we can truly feel tense throughout this entire scene, making this scene the standout moment of Aquaman, at least in my opinion. Then again, that scene still isn't better than the bar scene at the very beginning of Aquaman, because that scene is the only scene that gives a good follow-up after people sit or stand around to give some amount of exposition to progress the movie. No, seriously, Aquaman's use of exposition dumps is probably the most inconsistent thing about this movie. For instance, at the beginning of the movie, Orm's and King Nereus' discussion is used to establish Orm's motivations in Aquaman. However, while establishing Orm's motivations, this scene tells you so much information about the several kingdoms of Atlantis, all without the necessary visuals to make the scene interesting or digestible. Instead of doing what Wonder Woman did, which is show you beautiful visuals to help you visually understand which nations are being spoken about as we listen to the exposition dump regarding this side of the DC universe, Aquaman forces the viewer to just watch these two characters float around as they talk to each other in front of armored sea creatures, which do admittedly look cool as hell. Later on in Aquaman, however, Vulko, Aquaman's mentor, who's played by Willem Dafoe, and Aquaman's reunion are used as yet another opportunity for yet another exposition dump. That exposition dump is all about the origin story of Atlantis and the Trident of Atlan, which inevitably becomes Aquaman's weapon that's used to defeat Orm at the end of the movie. For that exposition dump, however, they do what Wonder Woman did, which is give beautiful visuals as the character gives a voiceover exposition dump as an effort to make the viewer care about Vulko's exposition dump, since it's vital to Aquaman's journey. And then there's my least favorite exposition dump scene in Aquaman, which is when Vulko tries to talk Aquaman out of fighting Orm, but Aquaman, being the type of guy he is, he's adamant that he has to go through with this fight. The reason I dislike this scene so much is because there's definitely a much more engaging way to go about this moment rather than what this movie went with, which is showcasing everything in an overly long, mediocre flashback. I don't have anything against this movie trying to show us Aquaman's beginnings, nor do I have anything against the actor who plays teenage Aquaman in this flashback, but I hate that this movie spends so much time only showing us Aquaman's past after Vulko asks Aquaman if he remembers what he was taught. It would have been so much more engaging if Vulko asked this question and then the movie shows them two sparring each other, and during the middle of the fight we see Aquaman using the same moves in the past as a fun back and forth montage, and that way we're being shown that yes, Aquaman remembers everything Vulko ever taught him, and we're also shown when Aquaman was first taught the moves he now knows. The idea of cutting away for what feels like the longest flashback ever, only for it to be ended by Aquaman throwing a trident toward Vulko as a transition back to the present, sucks. Sure, the flashback scene sets up the cool callback moment that happens during Aquaman and Orm's fight at the end of the movie, however, that doesn't change the fact that this exposition scene could have been as engaging as the rest of Aquaman. I don't need to see teenager Aquaman crying over missing Atlanta. We know that he grew up to miss his mom. We know that her absence played a big role in who Aquaman has become as a person. The movie tells us this multiple times, whether it's through actual lines of dialogue or through Aquaman's actions. They should have just done a back and forth montage scene where we're shown the past and present before Aquaman goes off to fight Orm in the Ring of Fire. And this isn't Aquaman's only inconsistency. I don't understand how this movie can go from showing Orm plotting his grand plan of attacking the land and becoming the king of Atlantis to offhandedly mentioning that he's somehow been aware of Aquaman being trained by Vulko for years. We're talking about the same movie that actively shows Orm making a pact with Black Manta to try and kill Aquaman at the beginning of the movie. We're talking about the same movie that even shows Orm giving Black Manta Atlantean weaponry, which is then used to create Black Manta's fantastic looking suit in this movie, and yet we're never shown how Orm learns of this news. We're never shown Orm finding this news out himself or being told this news, which leads to him being even more angry than he already is. Sure, you can make the argument of Orm possibly being familiar with Vulko's moves, which is how you can tell that Aquaman was trained by Vulko, but that doesn't necessarily follow the formula this movie has. If we were shown Orm discovering this news, we would have been on the edge of our seats because we know Orm is hot-headed and immature, just like Aquaman, but in a slightly different way due to their personality differences. On a first watch, no viewer would have put it past Orm to possibly kill Vulko as an act of revenge against Aquaman. And although Orm killing Vulko wouldn't tonally fit in Aquaman, since a big part of this movie's theme is hope, and since this movie is incredibly positive tonally, it would have been so much cooler if the movie at least made us second guess whether that happening was an actual possibility, because it would have added some much needed emotional stakes in Aquaman. Finally, this brings me to an unpopular opinion I have about Aquaman, and I've wanted to talk about this opinion for such a long time now. No, Aquaman didn't need more of Black Manta. In Aquaman, Black Manta being used as Orm's henchman is actually a good thing. Black Manta is used as a plot device to push Aquaman in the direction of becoming the hero he needs to become, and to push the sibling rivalry between Aquaman and Orm further. Maintaining the focus on this storyline in Aquaman is what helped make Aquaman's arc stick the landing, considering his entire journey relies on you caring about whether or not Atlanta's alive, and you caring about seeing Aquaman successfully stop Orin's plans, both of which are family-centric storylines. Any time that could have been dedicated to a much bigger third side plot for Black Manta would have ruined the pacing for this film, which is almost 3 hours long as is. And honestly, I don't necessarily think this movie did enough with Black Manta in the beginning to make us really care about Black Manta being anything more than Orin's henchman who's trying to get revenge for his father's death. Although Aquaman regrets not helping Black Manta or his father in the latter half of the film, Mera is right when she says that he was totally justified for not helping Black Manta or his father. We're talking about a character who's introduced as the next generation of a family bloodline that has a history of pirates who steal ships and kill people. Of course it's hard to be sympathetic towards Black Manta. Even if Black Manta wanting to get revenge for his father is justified from his perspective, exploring that motivation further in this movie would have felt like a massive flaw with Aquaman being filled with a ton of exposition dumps as is. Black Manta's perspective or anger towards Aquaman was always something that, to me, deserved to be an entire plot point broken down in another project, which is actually happening in Aquaman 2, rather than the exploration of Black Manta's perspective being a frustratingly shortened storyline in the first film that does more harm than good because it feels like it's constantly taking the viewer away from Aquaman and Mera or Orm and his crew. Black Manta coming back in a sequel that takes place years later with a much better suit, new weapons, and a massive thirst for revenge despite Aquaman thinking that he was dead after their final fight in Aquaman is the exact storyline and type of character development that, to me, Black Manta deserves. We spend so much time talking about Batman being a fantastic hero because he always seemingly manages to find a way to fit in prep time before he fights a villain or gets close to another hero. The idea of this type of preparation being done by a rage-filled villain who's already more than aware of who they're hunting down, along with the casual audiences already knowing their moveset and level of strength, is going to be so damn cool, hopefully. So no, we didn't need more of Black Manta in Aquaman. He fulfilled the exact role he needed to fulfill in this movie, and the exploration of his perspective in a sequel is allowing us to get something that actually needs to be more common in the superhero movie genre. The grand return of a side antagonist of an old superhero film where they're bigger, stronger, and angrier than ever before because they're seeking revenge against their lovable superhero protagonist. With Aquaman 2 doing exactly this, it retroactively fixed or addressed one of the most common complaints about this movie. Plus, it's made me far more excited for Aquaman 2 because that's one of my favorite tropes in comic books, be it in a video game, show, or comic book run. I love revenge stories. I love it when an overarching villain like Orm sends out a henchman to go kill a hero or heroes, only for that henchman to lose against the hero or heroes, leading them to making a shocking return with stronger weapons, a stronger suit, and more importantly, a massive thirst for revenge. There's also another massive benefit to Aquaman not having a ton of Black Manta in it. The lack of Black Manta allowed Ocean Master to shine. Ocean Master is one of the rare superhero movie villains who becomes more interesting as we spend more time with him. His hate and anger towards the surface dwellers is more than justified. He's entirely right to hate the surface dwellers considering the amount of damage that has been done to Atlantis over centuries. Sure, waging war on the surface dwellers is a genuinely awful plan and very short-sighted, but it's not until this movie actively shows us the amount of garbage that was sent back to the surface that you do find yourself thinking, you know, maybe Orm's got a point. Where Orm begins to shine though is once he and Aquaman find each other endlessly fighting for the King of Atlantis title. Orm exceeding the expectations of being a boring one-dimensional character who only has one goal in mind is what makes him stand out in Aquaman, and it's what makes him stand out as one of the best DCEU villains in general. Orm's dedication to showing Aquaman that he isn't built to be the king is something to be marveled at. Think about it. Orm decided to put on a mega fight between him and Aquaman in front of a massive crowd in an attempt to straight up kill Aquaman, or at the very least embarrass him in front of all of Atlantis. You can actively tell that not once did Orm ever think about the possibility of Aquaman being a decent fighter, and you can tell that not once did he think about something going wrong during this fight in the Ring of Fire. And while some may consider this a character flaw of Orm's, it's really not, whether it's because of him paying Black Manta to go kill Aquaman, or because he thinks he's a better fighter since he spent more time underwater. This type of short sight makes perfect sense for a character like Orm because he's Aquaman's younger brother. Of course Orm's going to think that he's a way better fighter and leader than Aquaman. This movie deserves so much credit for perfectly capturing the short-sighted perspective a younger sibling would have through Orm, while also capturing the much wider perspective older siblings tend to have through Aquaman. And although it's the most predictable storytelling decision ever, I love that this movie brings an end to this sibling rivalry, with Aquaman doing the pettiest thing an older sibling could do to their younger sibling in this exact scenario, breaking Orm's trident as Orm did to Aquaman during the Ring of Fire fight, but in a much cooler fashion. Aquaman, to me, successfully ties the knot for its ridiculous but incredibly engaging story, from ending the sibling rivalry by making Arthur the king of Atlantis, and by leaving the door open for a potential redemption arc for Orm in Aquaman 2, to lovingly giving Arthur's dad a happy ending that he deserves. It's hard to not love this movie, and I'll be honest, in the process of making this video, I've grown to realize that I truly love Aquaman more than I thought I did. Yes, Aquaman is a dumb, fun superhero movie. If you feel that way about this movie, you're not wrong. However, I genuinely think that it deserves far more credit for being exactly that. The movie didn't bite off more than it could chew, it didn't try to fit in any distracting DC continuity stuff outside that weird line of dialogue at the beginning of the film, and it didn't try to fit far too many storylines to the point of it being a slog, and it ultimately stuck the landing in a way that allowed it to age better as time goes on. On top of those things, Aquaman has a lovable protagonist, a fantastic supporting cast, genuinely amazing visuals, incredible camera work in all of its action scenes, one of the best uses of an underwater city in a movie I've ever seen, and some of the best live action superhero suits ever made. All things considered, Aquaman is a genuinely good superhero movie. I know it doesn't necessarily dive into serious themes like Wonder Woman does, but Aquaman does more than enough good things for me to remind people that this movie is better than they remember.